During the auction, the black maid exposed a hidden clause, and the Mafia boss realized everyone had been tricked. Naomi Jackson had been working at the prestigious Caruso estate for almost a year, her presence almost invisible to the rich guests who roamed the grand hallways. To them, she was just another face among the help, a black maid who quietly performed her duties without asking questions. But Naomi was no ordinary maid. Beneath her calm exterior, she had a sharp mind and a deep understanding of the world that others overlooked. As she stood in the back of the auction hall, quietly observing the room full of powerful people, her eyes scanned over the contract in her hands, a seemingly routine document for the upcoming auction. Naomi had been asked to ensure everything went smoothly, from the placement of guests to the distribution of the auction items. But as she skimmed the terms, something caught her eye, something unusual that could have easily slipped past anyone else. A clause buried deep within the fine print. A clause that wasn't meant to be seen by anyone. She leaned forward, heart racing, as she read the hidden clause once more. It wasn't just a simple error or a misunderstanding. No, this was something far more deliberate, something that, if not exposed, would cost the participants millions. Naomi had learned long ago that people like Dominic Caruso, the Mafia boss overseeing the auction, didn't like surprises, especially not surprises that exposed flaws in their carefully crafted plans. Dominic Caruso was no stranger to the world of high-stakes auctions. His name was synonymous with power, fear, and control. A man who could make entire industries bend to his will with a single phone call. But Naomi, with her keen eye, knew that in this room of well-dressed elites, she was the only one who had noticed the trap. She couldn't just stand by. The contract, the auction, it was all about to go terribly wrong, and no one knew it yet. Without hesitation, Naomi stepped forward, making her way across the room to the front where the auctioneer was preparing to start the bidding. All eyes were on her as she moved, her footsteps deliberate and confident. She had only one chance to make this right. As she reached the stage, the auctioneer paused, surprised by her sudden appearance. Naomi cleared her throat, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the whispers of the crowd. "Excuse me, but there's something wrong with the contract," she said, holding up the document for everyone to see. "This clause, it's been hidden on purpose. If it's allowed to stand, it will cost all of you far more than you bargained for." The room fell silent. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing nervously at each other. But it wasn't until Dominic Caruso, the Mafia boss, stood up from his seat at the back of the room that the true tension became clear. His dark eyes locked onto Naomi, a cold, calculating look in his gaze. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone knew that Dominic didn't tolerate being challenged, especially in public. Yet, there was something in his eyes, something that made Naomi realize that this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, about power, about who controlled the narrative in this room. Dominic stepped forward, his towering presence intimidating, but Naomi didn't flinch. She had already made her decision. "What is it that you think you've uncovered?" Dominic asked, his voice low and dangerous. Naomi remained calm, her eyes never leaving his. "This clause was added to manipulate the terms in favor of the seller," she explained, pointing to the hidden part of the contract. "It's a trap designed to force you into a binding agreement, where only one party stands to win." There was a long pause. The room was silent as Dominic Caruso's sharp gaze flicked from Naomi to the auctioneer and back. For a moment, Naomi thought he might dismiss her, but instead, he slowly nodded, a subtle but unmistakable recognition in his eyes. "I see," he said, his voice almost a whisper now, a rare hint of respect creeping into it. The guests exchanged confused glances, unsure of what was happening. Then, with a swift motion, Dominic turned to the auctioneer, his voice commanding, "Cancel the auction. Immediately." The tension in the room was palpable as people began to realize that Naomi had not only saved them from disaster, but had also earned the respect of one of the most feared men in the room. The auction was called off, and the crowd began to disperse, their murmurs of disbelief growing louder with every passing second. But as Naomi stood at the back of the room, still holding the contract, she couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride. In a room full of people who had underestimated her, she had shown them all the true power of intellect and integrity. She had won more than just the respect of a Mafia boss. She had won the respect of herself. Naomi Jackson couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air long after the auction had been called off. The crowd had slowly dispersed, and the once stuffy room now felt eerily quiet. Naomi stood near the back, still holding the contract that had disrupted everything. She could hear the murmurs of disbelief from the remaining guests, their voices tinged with both confusion and admiration. What had just happened? How had she seen through the hidden clause when no one else did? Naomi wasn't sure herself. It was instinct, a sharpened awareness she'd honed over the years, working in the shadows of the Caruso estate. Dominic Caruso, the Mafia boss, had barely spared her a second glance before today, but something had shifted in him. When he walked toward her, Naomi couldn't help but feel the weight of his gaze, sharp and penetrating. He was still the same powerful man, but now, there was a flicker of something else. Respect, perhaps? Naomi had saved the auction from falling apart, and she had saved the wealthy, influential people in the room from unknowingly stepping into a trap. Yet, she knew that this was not the end of it. It was just the beginning. She could feel eyes on her, but none of the usual disdain. People who had once looked through her, as if she were invisible, now looked at her with curiosity. That same feeling of being in the background, unimportant, started to fade away, replaced by something she wasn't used to, attention. Naomi straightened, trying to shake off the discomfort. She had a job to do, and she couldn't afford to be distracted by the sudden shift in how people saw her. She turned toward the exit, but before she could leave, a familiar voice stopped her. "Naomi," said a deep voice behind her. She turned to find Dominic Caruso standing there, his posture relaxed but commanding. His eyes, dark and intense, regarded her with a newfound respect. "You did well," he said quietly. Naomi nodded, unsure how to respond. The last thing she expected was praise from a man like Dominic. But before she could say anything, he continued, "I want to talk to you. Follow me." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. Was this some kind of trick? Was he testing her? But she had no choice but to follow him. Her curiosity piqued. As they walked down the long hallway of the Caruso estate, Naomi couldn't help but notice the change in the air. The usual oppressive tension that came with being around Dominic had shifted. It was still there, but now, there was something softer in his presence. It made Naomi uneasy. She wasn't used to this version of him, the one who wasn't barking orders or silently observing like a predator. They stopped in front of a door at the end of the hallway. Dominic opened it and gestured for Naomi to step inside. The room was dark, with only a single lamp illuminating the space. It was small, intimate, and felt a world away from the grand hall she'd just left behind. As Naomi entered, Dominic closed the door behind them, and the tension returned, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was charged with anticipation. He stood by the door, watching her carefully. Naomi could feel her pulse quicken as she met his gaze. "You're different from the others," he said slowly, his voice lower than before. "Most people would have let that auction go on without a second thought. But you saw something. You understood." Naomi swallowed, trying to steady her nerves. I didn't want anyone to be taken advantage of. It wasn't right." Dominic nodded, his lips curling into a faint smile. "I admire that." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with an unspoken meaning. Naomi didn't know what to say. She had never been in a situation like this, alone with Dominic Caruso in a room like this. The silence stretched on for a moment before he spoke again, this time with a hint of something she couldn't quite place. "I want you to stay here, with me," he said. Naomi blinked, unsure she'd heard him correctly. "What do you mean?" she asked. I want you to work directly with me. You've proven you have more than just cleaning skills. You have brains. You're observant." His words surprised her. She had always been just another maid to him, another worker in the background. But now, he was offering her something else. Something she wasn't sure she could accept. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because," he said, stepping closer, "I believe you can see the things others miss. You see the world for what it really is." Naomi could feel her heart racing, unsure of how to respond. She had always known that Dominic Caruso was dangerous, a man with too much power, but now, she was standing in front of him, not as a servant, but as someone who had earned his attention. She wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse, but what she did know was that this was a turning point. Her life was about to change, and for the first time, Naomi felt as though she was in control of her own destiny. She took a deep breath and met his gaze. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady and determined. Dominic nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Good," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I knew you'd be the one." Naomi didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Her days as just a maid were over. And from now on, she would be the one holding the cards. Naomi Jackson had barely had time to process the whirlwind of events that had unfolded after the auction when she found herself standing in front of Dominic Caruso's office. The man who had once been a distant, intimidating figure in her life now held her fate in his hands. The door in front of her loomed large, almost too grand for someone like her. She had spent years working in the shadows of the Caruso estate, scrubbing floors, folding laundry, and going unnoticed. But now, for the first time, she was being called to step into the light. She paused, taking a deep breath, before knocking gently on the door. A voice from inside responded, smooth and authoritative. "Come in." Naomi turned the handle and entered, her heart racing. Dominic was seated behind a massive desk, his eyes fixed on some papers in front of him. As she walked in, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "Close the door," he said, his voice calm but commanding. Naomi did as instructed, her hands trembling slightly. She had never been this close to him before, not like this. The tension in the air was palpable, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. Dominic's gaze never left her as she stood across from him. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. Naomi hesitated for a moment before sitting down, feeling the full force of his attention on her. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if the world outside had momentarily stopped. "I've been thinking about what you did," Dominic began, his tone measured. "Most people wouldn't have noticed that clause, much less exposed it in front of everyone. You saved us all a lot of trouble today." Naomi felt a surge of pride, but she kept her face neutral. "I just did what seemed right," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling in her chest. Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "It's not just about doing what's right, Naomi," he said slowly, as if weighing his words. "It's about seeing things other people miss, understanding what's beneath the surface." Naomi swallowed hard. She wasn't sure where this conversation was heading, but she knew one thing. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She had earned something that very few people in this world ever got: Dominic Caruso's attention. "You've got an eye for detail," he continued. "And that's not something I take lightly. I want someone like you on my team. Someone who can think critically and act when necessary." Naomi's mind raced. This was what she had always wanted, right? To be seen for who she truly was. To be more than just the help. But working for Dominic Caruso, for the Mafia, was a dangerous game. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the consequences of stepping into this world, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. "What are you asking me to do?" she finally asked, her voice low. Dominic smiled slightly, a rare softness to his expression. "I'm offering you a position with me," he said. "Not just as a maid, but as someone who handles things, important things." Naomi felt a rush of emotions flood through her. Excitement, fear, and a sense of disbelief. This was her chance. The moment she had waited for. "I'll need you to be discreet, Naomi. This isn't a position for someone who wants to be in the spotlight, but it is one where you'll have more influence than you can imagine." He leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I need someone I can trust. Someone who can handle the truth when things go wrong. Can I count on you?" Naomi nodded without hesitation, her voice firm. "Yes, you can count on me." The words felt heavy as they left her lips, but she meant them. This was her moment. Dominic studied her for a long moment, as if gauging whether or not she truly understood the gravity of what she was agreeing to. Finally, he stood up, signaling the end of their conversation. "Good," he said, his voice softer now, almost approving. "Welcome to the team, Naomi." As she stood up to leave, Naomi couldn't help but feel a mixture of triumph and apprehension. She had just crossed a line, one that she could never uncross. There was no turning back now. She was no longer just a maid. She was now part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. But she was ready to take control of her own fate. And as she walked out of Dominic's office, the weight of her new role settled on her shoulders. Naomi Jackson was no longer invisible. She was seen. and she would make sure no one would ever forget it. Naomi Jackson's life had taken a turn, and she was still processing what it all meant. After the conversation with Dominic Caruso, everything felt different. The weight of the position he had offered her was heavy, but there was something exhilarating about it as well. She had always been on the outside looking in, working quietly in the background, but now she was being pulled into the center of it all. She had no illusions about what this meant. Being part of Dominic's inner circle came with risks, dangers that she couldn't yet fully comprehend. But she was ready to step up, ready to take control of her life. Naomi spent the following days adjusting to her new role. The work was different, more demanding, more complex. She wasn't just running errands or making sure the mansion was spotless anymore. She was tasked with managing details, making decisions, observing the people around her with a new sense of purpose. She had a sharp eye, and Dominic was right to see that. What she didn't expect was how quickly the change affected her relationship with the other staff. The housemaids, once her peers, now eyed her with curiosity. Some were envious, others confused. Naomi could feel the shift, but she remained focused. She had no time to dwell on the whispers behind her back. There was too much to learn, too much to prove. And Dominic was everywhere. His presence was constant, his expectations high. Naomi often found herself in his office, helping with small but significant details of his operations. She was trusted now, and with that trust came a strange sense of responsibility. One afternoon, Dominic asked her to accompany him to a private meeting with a potential business partner. It was a big deal, an opportunity for expansion, a new venture in the city that could change everything. Naomi's nerves were on edge as they arrived at the meeting location, a high-end hotel suite overlooking the skyline. The moment they stepped into the room, Naomi could sense the tension. She was the only one who wasn't a part of the business world, the only one who wasn't dressed in a sharp suit or tie. She felt out of place, but she quickly reminded herself that she belonged here now. Dominic sat at the head of the table, his posture confident, his voice calm and authoritative as he greeted the guests. Naomi stood quietly by his side, watching the exchange closely. The conversation was about money, millions of dollars, investments, partnerships. It was all business, but Naomi was beginning to understand the intricacies of it. She listened closely, her eyes scanning the room. At one point, she noticed a slight hesitation in the way one of the investors, a man named Arthur Reynolds, glanced at Dominic. It was subtle, but Naomi caught it. She filed it away in her mind. Something was off. The meeting continued, and soon enough, it was over. Dominic and Arthur shook hands, the deal seemingly done. As the other men left, Dominic turned to Naomi. "You noticed something, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. Naomi nodded, her instincts telling her there was more to this than it seemed. "Reynolds is hiding something," she said. "The way he looked at you, it wasn't just about the deal." Dominic's eyes narrowed as he considered her words. "You're learning quickly," he said, a hint of approval in his voice. "We'll see what we can uncover." Over the next few days, Naomi became more involved in the investigation. She dug deeper into Arthur Reynolds' past, going through old files, making discreet inquiries. She was surprised at how much she could find with just a few well-placed questions. The information she uncovered was damning. Reynolds had been involved in shady deals, partnerships that were anything but legitimate. Naomi knew this was the kind of information that Dominic would need to make his next move. She brought everything to him one evening, after most of the house had gone quiet. She had been in his office for hours, but the look on Dominic's face when she walked in with the file told her it was all worth it. "You were right," she said, setting the file down in front of him. "Arthur Reynolds isn't just a businessman. He's involved in illegal activities." Dominic flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. Naomi waited, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, he looked up at her. "This is the kind of thing that could ruin him," he said quietly. "And it's the kind of thing we can use." Naomi nodded, but there was a part of her that felt uneasy. She had never been a part of this world, this web of lies and manipulation. But now she was, and there was no turning back. Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've done well, Naomi," he said, his voice calm but filled with a strange sense of approval. "I knew you had it in you." Naomi felt a strange thrill at his words, but also a sense of foreboding. She had earned his respect, but she knew that in this world, respect came at a cost. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice steady. Now, Dominic said, his gaze locking onto hers. We make sure Reynolds knows that we're in control. Naomi nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She had come a long way from the quiet Maid in the Caruso estate. Now, she was part of something far larger, something far more dangerous. But she was ready. Ready to fight for her place in this world. Ready to play the game. And as she left Dominic's office that night, Naomi felt a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Naomi Jackson had always prided herself on her sharp instincts, but this new chapter in her life was testing her in ways she had never imagined. The information she had uncovered about Arthur Reynolds had shifted the dynamic within the Caruso estate, but she still couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her stomach. There were too many moving parts, too many people involved, and Naomi knew that if she made one wrong move, everything could come crashing down. Dominic Caruso had trusted her, but trust in his world was a double-edged sword. One mistake could lead to her downfall. The next few days passed in a blur. Naomi's role had shifted even further. She wasn't just managing small tasks now. She was involved in everything. Every meeting, every deal, every plan. Dominic made sure she was right by his side, observing, learning, and contributing. She was part of the decision-making process, something she never thought possible just weeks ago. The estate was bustling with activity, preparations for a major deal that Dominic had been working on for months. Naomi watched as he navigated through the complex web of business negotiations, always staying one step ahead. It was fascinating to her, how he could read people, anticipate their moves, and stay calm under pressure. She admired him more than she had expected. But admiration didn't mean she trusted him completely. Naomi kept her distance, never forgetting the kind of world she was now in. Despite the glamour and power, there was always the dark undertone of danger. She was living in the shadows of the Mafia, and she couldn't afford to forget it. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Naomi found herself alone in Dominic's office. The paperwork had piled up, and she was left to go through it. She had become accustomed to staying late, often working long hours after everyone else had left. As she flipped through the documents, a knock on the door interrupted her focus. "Come in," Naomi called out, her voice steady despite the surprise. The door opened, and to her surprise, it was Dominic who walked in. His presence filled the room, and Naomi quickly stood up in respect. "I didn't expect you to be here so late," he said, his voice smooth as always. "I could say the same about you," Naomi replied, trying to keep her tone casual. Dominic smiled slightly, and for the first time, Naomi saw a hint of exhaustion in his eyes. It was a rare glimpse, one that made her realize just how much weight he carried on his shoulders. "There's a lot to manage," he said, sitting down across from her. "But it's the price you pay for being in charge." Naomi nodded, understanding the unspoken truth behind his words. Power came with sacrifices, and Dominic had made his share. "You've been doing well," he continued, his eyes locking with hers. "Better than I expected, actually." Naomi felt a strange flutter in her chest. She had never been one to seek praise, but from Dominic, it meant more than she had anticipated. "Thank you," she said, keeping her voice even. "I'm just doing my job." Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. "No, Naomi, you're doing more than that. You're proving that you belong here." Naomi felt the weight of his words. She had proven herself, but she also knew that in this world, proving yourself could sometimes be a dangerous game. "I appreciate the opportunity," she said carefully, not wanting to show too much vulnerability. Dominic's gaze softened, though the intensity never fully left his eyes. "You've got potential," he said, his voice low. "I'm not one to give compliments easily, but you've earned mine." The compliment caught Naomi off guard. She had worked hard to get here, to rise above the status of just another maid in the Caruso estate, but hearing those words from Dominic felt like more than just recognition. It felt like approval. It was the kind of approval that could open doors, but it also came with a weight she wasn't sure she was ready for. "I won't let you down," Naomi said, her voice steady but with an undertone of determination. Dominic nodded, standing up from his chair. "I know you won't. That's why I'm giving you more responsibility. You'll be handling the logistics for the upcoming meeting with our partners. It's a big deal, and I need someone I can trust to keep everything in line." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. The responsibility was immense, and she knew that this was her chance to prove herself once again. "I won't disappoint you," she said, her voice firm. Dominic gave her a rare smile, one that made her heart race. "I know you won't." As he left the office, Naomi sat back in her chair, processing what had just transpired. She was being trusted with more, given more authority. But with that came even more pressure. She wasn't just working for Dominic Caruso anymore. She was becoming a part of his world, a world she knew could easily swallow her whole if she wasn't careful. But Naomi wasn't afraid. She had come too far to turn back now. She was ready to rise to the challenge, ready to take on whatever came next. And no matter what, she would make sure that no one ever underestimated her again. Naomi Jackson knew that the next phase of her journey in the world of Dominic Caruso was about to test her in ways she hadn't experienced before. The logistics meeting she had been entrusted with was only days away, and with it came a level of responsibility that was impossible to ignore. She was no longer just a maid, no longer just a bystander in the chaotic operations of the Caruso estate. She was a key player now, handling the kind of details that could make or break a deal. As the days passed, Naomi found herself working more closely with Dominic, going over contracts, communicating with potential partners, and ensuring that the meeting ran smoothly. Each task she completed was a small victory, but the pressure to perform well was mounting. Naomi understood that her position was fragile. One wrong move, and she could lose everything. She had been trusted with more power, but that power came with its own set of risks. The estate was abuzz with activity. Staff members moved swiftly through the halls, preparing for the high-stakes meeting that would take place in just a few days. Naomi could feel the tension in the air, but she refused to let it shake her. She was ready for this. The night before the meeting, Naomi found herself alone in the office once again, going over the final details. She had everything planned down to the smallest detail: who would be sitting where, what documents needed to be signed, which team members would be responsible for each part of the meeting. It was all in her hands now. As she worked, her mind wandered briefly to the people she had left behind. Her life had changed so dramatically in such a short period. She had once been invisible, just another employee doing her job. Now, she was standing on the edge of something far bigger, something that had the potential to elevate her to places she had never imagined. But even as she thought about her progress, she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Naomi knew that she was playing in a world that operated on power, manipulation, and secrecy. It was a world she had never been part of, and yet, it was now the world she was a part of. Dominic had made it clear that he trusted her, but that didn't mean she was safe. There was always someone else waiting to take her place if she faltered. Naomi's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. She looked up, surprised. It was late, and most of the staff had long since gone home. "Come in," she called out, trying to mask the nervousness in her voice. The door opened, and Dominic Caruso stepped into the room. His presence was commanding as always, but there was something different about him tonight. His usual cool demeanor was replaced with something more relaxed, almost vulnerable. "I didn't expect to see you still here," he said, his voice low. Naomi stood up quickly, straightening her posture. "I'm just making sure everything's in order for tomorrow," she said. Dominic's gaze softened slightly. "You've been working nonstop, Naomi. You've done more than enough." Naomi hesitated before responding, unsure if she should acknowledge the compliment. "I just want to make sure everything goes smoothly," she said, her voice steady. Dominic walked toward her, his footsteps measured and deliberate. "I appreciate it," he said, stopping in front of her. There was a brief pause before he continued, his tone more serious. "I want you to know something. You're not just some worker here anymore. You've earned your place." Naomi's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had worked so hard for this moment, and yet, hearing it from him made it feel real. She had proven herself. But as quickly as the moment passed, reality set in. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice unwavering. Dominic studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching hers. For a brief second, Naomi wondered if he saw the uncertainty she was trying to hide. But then, he gave her a slight smile. "I know you won't." With that, he turned and walked toward the door. "Tomorrow is a big day. You've earned the right to be part of this," he said, his voice carrying a hint of approval. Naomi stood there, watching him leave, her thoughts racing. Tomorrow would be a defining moment. It would be the moment that proved whether she could truly stand alongside Dominic Caruso or if she would crumble under the pressure. The weight of the responsibility was heavy, but Naomi had come too far to back down now. The next day arrived quickly, and Naomi was up before the sun, making sure every detail was in place. She arrived at the meeting room early, double-checking the seating arrangements, the documents, and the technology. She was determined to ensure that everything was perfect. As the guests began to arrive, Naomi observed the powerful figures who were now walking into the room. Investors, businessmen, and power players she had only ever seen from a distance. Dominic entered last. As expected, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Naomi stood quietly by his side, feeling a sense of pride and fear mingling in her chest. The meeting began, and Naomi watched closely, her mind processing every word, every gesture. Dominic was in his element, guiding the conversation with ease, his confidence palpable. Naomi contributed when needed, ensuring everything went smoothly. She had earned her place in this world, and today, she was proving it. By the end of the meeting, the deal was sealed, and Naomi had played an integral role in its success. As the room cleared out, Dominic turned to her, a rare smile on his face. "Well done," he said. "You did exactly what I needed." Naomi nodded, feeling the weight of the day's events finally settling in. She had done it. She had earned Dominic's respect, and she had proven to herself that she could thrive in this world. There was no turning back now. Naomi was no longer just a maid. She was a part of something much bigger. She had become a force to be reckoned with, and nothing could stand in her way. Naomi Jackson had come a long way since she first stepped into the Caruso estate, her life forever changed by the opportunities and risks that now surrounded her. The meeting had been a success, and Dominic Caruso had made it clear that she had proven herself. But Naomi knew that the Real challenge was just beginning. She had been thrust into a world that was as unpredictable as it was dangerous, and now, she had to navigate it carefully. The days following the meeting were filled with new tasks and responsibilities. Naomi's role had expanded once again. She was no longer just handling logistics for meetings. Now, she was dealing with high-level negotiations, interacting with powerful people, and making decisions that would affect not only the Caruso estate, but also the future of the people who depended on it. She had earned Dominic's trust, but she also knew that trust was fragile, and it could be lost in an instant. Naomi was walking a fine line. The once quiet, invisible Maid was now in the center of it all. Her every move was being watched, and every decision she made carried weight. But Naomi wasn't afraid. She had learned to trust her instincts, to listen to the whispers in the corners of the estate, and to read between the lines of every conversation. She had become more than just a part of the operation. She was integral to its success. One evening, as Naomi was working late in her office, a knock on the door startled her. She looked up to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his dark eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "I need you to come with me," he said, his voice calm. But there was a sharpness to it that made Naomi's pulse quicken. She stood immediately, her instincts kicking in. Whatever it was important. She followed Dominic through the quiet halls of the estate, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. As they reached the private wing of the mansion, Naomi couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. This was uncharted territory. They stopped outside a door she had never seen before, a heavy, ornate wooden door that seemed to hold an air of secrecy. Dominic turned to her, his expression serious. "This is where we keep the most sensitive information," he said, his voice low. "I'm giving you access to this room, but you must understand, this is not just about business. It's about power, trust, and loyalty." Naomi nodded, her heart beating faster. She knew that this was another test, a test that would push her even further into the world she had become a part of. Dominic opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Inside, the room was dimly lit, filled with bookshelves lined with files and documents. There were maps on the walls, photos, and papers that detailed everything from business dealings to personal connections. It was like a map of Dominic's empire. Naomi's eyes scanned the room, taking in the vast amounts of information. "You've earned your place here, Naomi," Dominic said as he walked over to a large desk in the center of the room. "Now, you need to understand what's at stake." He handed her a folder filled with documents. "These are the people who think they can challenge us," he continued. "They don't understand the way we operate, and they will never see us coming. Naomi looked at the folder, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside were details of a rival family, a family that had been trying to encroach on Caruso territory. Naomi's mind raced as she absorbed the information. This was bigger than anything she had been involved in before. It wasn't just about contracts and business meetings anymore. This was about survival. "I need you to keep an eye on this," Dominic said, his voice firm. "The stakes are higher now. You need to be ready for whatever comes next." Naomi nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders. She had been trusted with information that could destroy people, could change the course of everything. But as she looked at Dominic, she realized something else. He wasn't just giving her power. He was giving her a chance to prove that she could stand with him, not just by him. It was a chance that most people would never get. And it was one that Naomi wasn't going to squander. The next few days were a blur of activity. Naomi spent hours going over the documents Dominic had given her, learning the ins and outs of the rival family's operations. She worked closely with Dominic, meeting with advisors, discussing strategies, and preparing for what was to come. But no matter how much she immersed herself in the work, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The staff members who had once been her colleagues now treated her with a mix of respect and fear. It was clear that Naomi's rise within the Caruso organization hadn't gone unnoticed. Even some of Dominic's closest associates seemed wary of her. It was a constant reminder of the price of power. But Naomi didn't let it distract her. She was focused on the task at hand, focused on proving herself to Dominic and to herself. One afternoon, as she was finishing up a report in her office, her phone buzzed with a message from Dominic. "Meet me in the conference room in 10 minutes. It's time." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She knew what this meant. The moment of truth had arrived. She quickly gathered her things and headed to the conference room. When she entered, Dominic was already there, along with a few of his trusted lieutenants. The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation. "We have a decision to make," Dominic said, his voice steady but with an edge of seriousness that sent a chill down Naomi's spine. "The rival family has made their move. It's time to show them that we don't back down." Naomi nodded, her mind racing. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. Dominic turned to her, his eyes locking onto hers. "You've proven yourself, Naomi. Now, it's your turn to take the lead. What's your plan?" Naomi took a deep breath. She had earned this moment. She had earned the right to stand beside Dominic and lead with him. "We'll hit them where it hurts," she said, her voice confident. "We'll use their own weaknesses against them, create a situation where they'll be forced to make a move. And when they do, we'll be ready." Dominic's gaze never wavered as he studied her. "Good," he said, a rare hint of a smile on his lips. "You're ready." Naomi felt a surge of pride as she looked around the room at the people who had once seen her as nothing more than a maid. Now, they saw her as a leader. And as the plan began to take shape, Naomi knew one thing for sure. She had made it. She was no longer just a part of Dominic's world. She was a force within it. And she would do whatever it took to protect the empire she had helped build. Naomi Jackson felt a steady pulse of anticipation as the plan she had helped shape began to unfold. The tension in the air was thick, the silence in the room heavy with expectation. The rival family had made their move, just as she had predicted, and now it was time for the Caruso family to strike back. She stood beside Dominic, her mind focused on the details, her heart steady in the face of what was to come. As the team gathered around the conference table, Naomi couldn't help but notice the shift in their attitudes toward her. There was no longer the same wariness, the same hesitation. They had seen what she was capable of, and now they were looking to her for guidance. Dominic's eyes never left her as he gave the final instructions. His tone was sharp, precise. "We have one chance to do this right. Naomi, you'll be leading the operation. You know the weaknesses. Now it's time to act." Naomi nodded. This was her moment, the one she had been preparing for. The plan she had designed was simple yet effective. By exploiting the rival family's internal conflicts and using their overconfidence against them, she had created the perfect setup. Naomi had identified the key players in the rival family, each with their own hidden agendas and weaknesses. She knew exactly how to play on those vulnerabilities. She had the advantage of being underestimated, something she had learned to use to her benefit. As the operation unfolded, Naomi's calm demeanor remained unshaken. She had spent hours going over every detail, making sure that every move was calculated, every action precise. Now, as she stood at the center of it all, she was the one making the decisions. She was no longer just a bystander. She was a leader. The Caruso family's rivals had underestimated her, and that mistake was about to cost them. Naomi watched as the rival family's plan began to unravel, just as she had foreseen. The carefully laid out trap was taking its toll, and the rival family was scrambling to cover their tracks. The look on Dominic's face was one of admiration. "You did it," he said, his voice low but filled with approval. Naomi nodded, her focus never wavering. There was no time to relax. This was just the beginning. As the day went on, Naomi continued to coordinate the operation, guiding the team through each stage with precision. She had earned her place, but the real test was in how she would maintain her position. In this world, nothing was guaranteed. After the operation was complete, Naomi and Dominic sat together in his office, reviewing the results. The rival family had been dealt a significant blow, and the Caruso family had emerged victorious. But Naomi knew that the victory was just the first step. "You've done well," Dominic said, his voice steady. Naomi met his gaze. "We've done well," she corrected. This was a team effort. Dominic's lips twitched upward in the slightest of smiles. "True, but you led them. You made it happen." Naomi felt a swell of pride, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you," she said quietly. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. "This is just the beginning for you, Naomi. You've proven you can handle the pressure, but there's always more to learn. More to do." Naomi nodded, understanding the unspoken message. She had come far, but she knew she couldn't rest on her laurels. The world she was a part of didn't allow for complacency. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said, her voice firm. Dominic studied her for a moment before nodding. "I believe you are." As the days passed, Naomi's role within the Caruso family continued to evolve. She was no longer just a strategist behind the scenes. She was now a key decision-maker, someone whose opinion mattered in the most critical moments. The power she had gained, however, came with its own set of challenges. She found herself at the center of more complex negotiations, her every move watched by those who had once doubted her. The staff, the advisors, and even Dominic's closest associates now turned to her for answers. The respect she had earned was palpable, but Naomi understood that it came with a cost. Power in this world was fleeting, and loyalty was easily bought or lost. One evening, Dominic summoned her to his office once again. When she entered, she found him standing by the window, his back to her as he stared out over the estate. There was a heaviness to the air, a tension that Naomi hadn't felt before. "There's something you need to understand," Dominic said, his voice low. Naomi stepped forward, waiting for him to continue. "In this world, people will try to take what's yours. They will try to undermine you, to bring you down. You've already seen it happen with the rival family. It's only going to get worse." Naomi met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. Dominic turned to face her, his eyes dark with a mixture of caution and approval. "Good. Because you're not just playing for yourself anymore. You're playing for everything." Naomi knew what he meant. She wasn't just a part of the Caruso family's operations. She was integral to its survival, and the stakes were higher than ever. But as she looked at Dominic, she realized something else. She wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. This was her world now, and she was going to make sure she ruled it. Naomi Jackson had never felt more certain of her place within the Caruso empire than she did now. Her actions had shown her value, and Dominic Caruso had made it clear there was no turning back. She wasn't just working alongside him. She was part of his world now. The power, the strategy, the risks, it was all hers to manage. The following weeks brought new challenges, ones that Naomi had been preparing for but had never fully imagined. The Caruso estate was more than just a lavish mansion. It was a fortress, and Naomi had become one of its key sentinels. She was tasked with monitoring the ever-shifting landscape of business deals, internal politics, and the subtle power struggles that could erupt at any moment. It wasn't just about handling logistics anymore. She was making decisions that influenced the very direction of the empire. She had the confidence of Dominic and the trust of his inner circle, but Naomi knew that in a world where loyalty was fragile, trust could be just as easily lost. There was always someone waiting for an opportunity to take her place, and she couldn't afford to be careless. Her every move was scrutinized, and though she had proven herself time and time again, she understood that the real test was maintaining this position, not just achieving it. One evening, Dominic called Naomi to his office. He was standing by the window, as he often did when he needed to think. The city lights gleamed in the distance, but there was something different in the air tonight. The tension in the room was palpable, and Naomi could sense it immediately. She walked in without hesitation, as if she belonged there, even though part of her was always aware of the delicate balance she was walking. Dominic turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "We have a situation," he said, his voice sharp, the calm exterior of his demeanor belying the seriousness of his words. Naomi stood still, her mind already racing through the possibilities. "What kind of situation?" she asked. Dominic didn't answer immediately. He walked toward the desk and sat down, motioning for Naomi to take a seat across from him. She did so, keeping her posture straight, her hands resting on her lap. "A potential leak," Dominic said finally. "Someone inside the family might be working against us." Naomi's stomach tightened. A leak was one of the most dangerous threats a family like theirs could face. It could tear everything apart: loyalties, trust, operations. The Caruso empire could crumble in an instant. "Who do you suspect?" Naomi asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of him. "I'm not sure yet," he said, his eyes dark with calculation. "But there's been an unusual shift in the business dealings. Small things, details that shouldn't be overlooked, but I trust you to find out who's behind it." Naomi nodded, her mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. "I'll handle it," she said. Dominic's gaze softened for a brief moment, but his tone remained firm. "I know you will." Naomi left Dominic's office with a sense of purpose. The problem was clear. Someone close to the Caruso family had been feeding information to their rivals, and Naomi was tasked with uncovering the culprit. She spent the following days combing through the company's financial records, talking to employees, and asking questions in the right places. She relied on her instincts, the same instincts that had gotten her this far. The more she dug, the more she realized how deep the betrayal ran. It wasn't just a few small leaks. There were strategic moves being made, moves that threatened the very foundation of the family business. Someone was playing a long game, and Naomi was determined to figure out who. As she worked through the night, one name kept resurfacing, someone who had been close to Dominic for years, someone who had always been in the shadows but whose movements now seemed suspicious. Naomi knew that she had to tread carefully. Trusting the wrong person could lead to disaster. But she was no longer the scared maid she once was. She had earned her place, and she wasn't about to let anyone bring her down. The breakthrough came when Naomi uncovered a trail of transactions that linked one of Dominic's trusted associates to the rival family. It was subtle at first, small, seemingly inconsequential payments, hidden in layers of financial jargon. But Naomi had learned how to read between the lines. She knew exactly what she was looking for. The associate in question had been siphoning funds from the Caruso accounts and funneling them to the rival family in exchange for inside information. Naomi's heart pounded as she processed the information. This was it. The leak had been found. But now, Naomi had to make a choice. Confronting this associate would have massive consequences. It could lead to a rupture within the family, distrust among the staff, and potentially even a war with the rival family. Naomi didn't hesitate. She walked straight into Dominic's office the next morning, the evidence in her hand. Dominic was sitting at his desk, reading through some papers when Naomi entered. He looked up, his expression unreadable, but Naomi could see the flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "I found the leak," she said, placing the papers on his desk. Dominic's gaze flicked to the documents, then back to Naomi. His expression remained calm, but Naomi could feel the weight of the moment. "Who is it?" he asked. "Cameron DiCarlo," Naomi said. "One of your closest associates. He's been working with the rival family, leaking information and siphoning funds from the accounts." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his face darkening as he processed the news. Naomi could see the calculation in his eyes. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "It's been going on for months," Naomi replied. "I've got everything documented." Dominic stood up, walking to the window. "This is more than just a betrayal. This is a direct attack on the family." Naomi nodded. "I know." Dominic turned to face her, his gaze intense. "You've done well, Naomi," he said quietly. "You've proven yourself time and time again." Naomi felt a strange sense of pride at his words, but she knew there was still work to be done. "What happens now?" she asked. "We take care of it," Dominic replied, his voice cold with determination. "No one betrays us and gets away with it." Naomi knew that things were about to escalate, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to face whatever came next. This was her world now, and no one was going to take it from her. Naomi Jackson knew that the moment had come, the moment where her decisions would define not only her place within the Caruso empire, but also the future of the family itself. Dominic had trusted her to uncover the leak within their ranks, and she had done so. The revelation that Cameron DeCarlo, one of Dominic's closest associates, had been feeding information to the rival family and siphoning funds was a devastating blow. Now, Naomi had to help Dominic decide what to do with the traitor in their midst. The tension in the air was palpable as she sat across from Dominic in his office, the evidence she had uncovered spread out before them. Dominic's face was unreadable, his eyes cold as he scanned the documents. Naomi knew he had been through countless betrayals in his life, but this was different. Cameron had been with them for years, trusted by Dominic himself. Naomi could see the weight of the decision in his eyes. "What do we do now?" Naomi asked, her voice steady. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk as he considered the situation. "The question isn't what we do now," he said slowly, his voice low. "It's what message we send." Naomi understood immediately. This wasn't just about dealing with Cameron. It was about sending a clear message to everyone in the Caruso family and beyond. Betrayal would not be tolerated, no matter who it came from. If we let him go, if we show any weakness, it could destroy everything we've built, Dominic continued. But if we make an example of him, we show the world that we don't tolerate this. Naomi's heart raced as she realized the gravity of the situation. She had seen this side of Dominic before, his ability to make tough, unforgiving decisions without hesitation. But this was different. Cameron wasn't some faceless enemy. He was someone who had worked closely with Dominic, someone who had gained his trust. "What if there's a way to handle it without making it public?" Naomi asked, her voice carefully measured. "What if we remove him quietly, without creating unnecessary chaos?" Dominic looked at her, his gaze sharp and calculating. "You're thinking like a strategist," he said, a hint of approval in his voice. "But the problem with that approach is that it doesn't send the message we need. People need to understand that this is bigger than just one person. It's about loyalty, and without loyalty, this whole empire collapses." Naomi took a deep breath, weighing his words. She had always been careful to stay in the shadows, to avoid making waves. But she also knew that this was her world now, and if she was going to be a part of it, she couldn't afford to be passive. "I understand," she said finally, her voice steady. "We need to show strength." Dominic nodded, the decision made. "We'll handle it quietly, but firmly. No one will question us after this." Naomi didn't speak again, but the weight of the decision lingered in the air as she stood up, ready to carry out the plan. The next few days were filled with tension, as Naomi worked behind the scenes to ensure everything went smoothly. Cameron was dealt with swiftly, and the message was clear. Those who betrayed the Caruso family would never be allowed to thrive. The operation was clean, and no one questioned Dominic's authority. Naomi was back at the center of it all, managing the aftermath of the decision with precision. But even as the dust settled, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at stake than just loyalty. This was a test, one that would determine how far Dominic was willing to go to protect the empire. As she watched him in the days that followed, Naomi began to see the true cost of power. Dominic Caruso wasn't just a man who ran a criminal empire. He was someone who had built everything from the ground up, someone who had sacrificed pieces of his soul to hold onto his position. And Naomi was beginning to understand just how much she had sacrificed to be a part of it. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about survival, loyalty, and the constant balancing act between power and vulnerability. Naomi knew that she had earned her place beside Dominic, but she also knew that her journey was far from over. There would be more betrayals, more challenges, and more moments that would test her resolve. But she was ready to stand by Dominic's side, ready to protect the empire she had helped build, and ready to make sure that no one, not even those closest to them, could ever tear it down. As the days passed, Naomi's role grew even more influential. She was no longer just a trusted advisor. She was now integral to the decision-making process. She had earned the respect of the family, but with that respect came a burden. Naomi had become part of the core of the Caruso empire, and that meant everything she did now would be scrutinized. But Naomi wasn't afraid. She had come too far to let fear hold her back. She was ready to fight for her place, to protect the empire she had helped shape, and to make sure that no one, not even those who had once been trusted, would ever be able to tear it down. The stakes had never been higher, but Naomi Jackson was no longer just a bystander. She was a force to be reckoned with, and nothing at all, could stand in her way. Naomi Jackson had crossed yet another threshold. The events surrounding Cameron DeCarlo's betrayal had tested her in ways she never anticipated. With his removal, the Caruso empire had taken a firm stance, reinforcing its unwavering grip on power. The weight of that decision lingered, but Naomi now understood better than ever that power was not just earned. It was maintained through relentless action and unwavering resolve. As the days passed, Naomi's role within the family continued to evolve. No longer just an observer or a trusted advisor, she was now a key strategist, making decisions that had direct consequences on the family's future. She had proven herself to Dominic and to those around her. But now the question was, could she continue to perform at this level? Could she keep the loyalty of those who had once doubted her and ensure that the family's interests came first, no matter the cost? The Caruso estate was alive with activity, preparations for new business ventures, and the constant hum of meetings. Naomi was in the thick of it all, overseeing everything with a precision that even Dominic had come to rely on. It was as though the entire estate had become her domain. She moved with purpose through the hallways, making sure the right people were in place, ensuring the smooth flow of operations. Every day felt like a test, but Naomi was learning how to thrive under pressure. But with this newfound responsibility came the knowledge that one mistake could undo everything she had worked for. There were new threats, new rivals, and enemies lurking just beyond the borders of their reach. Naomi knew that the more she rose, the more visible she became, and the more vulnerable. One late evening, Dominic summoned her to his office. Naomi had grown accustomed to the late-night meetings by now, but there was something different about this one. The urgency in his tone was unmistakable. She entered the room to find Dominic standing by the window, his back to her as usual. The city lights below glistened, but the atmosphere in the room felt heavier than ever. "What's going on?" Naomi asked, her voice calm, though her senses were on high alert. Dominic turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. There was something unreadable in his gaze, something that made Naomi's heart race. "I've been getting reports," he said, his voice low. "There's someone within our ranks trying to make a power move. Someone close to us. We need to figure out who it is." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting something like this. Tension was inevitable in a world built on power struggles, but hearing it confirmed made it feel all too real. "Who do you suspect?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. Dominic's eyes hardened. "I don't know yet, but I need you to find out. This isn't just about business anymore. This is about loyalty. Whoever is behind this is trying to tear us apart from the inside." Naomi nodded. She could feel the gravity of the situation weighing down on her, but she wasn't about to back down. "I'll handle it," she said, her voice firm. Dominic studied her for a long moment before nodding. "I know you will." As Naomi left Dominic's office, her mind immediately began racing. Who could it be? Who in the Caruso inner circle would be bold enough to go behind Dominic's back? She had seen the power struggles before, people jockeying for position, trying to get ahead, but this felt different. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to climb the ladder. They were trying to bring the whole thing crashing down. Naomi spent the next few days investigating quietly, speaking with various associates and staff members without drawing attention to herself. She had learned the importance of patience and subtlety in her role. This was about gathering information and understanding the larger picture, not rushing into anything recklessly. The more she dug, the more Naomi realized just how deeply this threat had infiltrated their operations. It wasn't just one person, it was a group, a faction that had been slowly gaining power, undermining Dominic's authority with small but strategic moves. Naomi had her suspicions, but she needed hard evidence before she could confront anyone. One afternoon, as she went through some of the financial records, she uncovered something that made her blood run cold. There were large, unaccounted-for transfers of money that had been routed through several accounts before landing in the hands of a trusted associate of Dominic's. The name on the transfer documents was familiar: Giovanni Moretti. Naomi had known Giovanni for years. He was a senior advisor in the Caruso family, respected and well-connected. But now, it seemed that he was more than just an advisor. Naomi's mind raced as she pieced together the details. Moretti had been the one to introduce Dominic to some of their biggest business partners. He had been trusted with some of the most sensitive operations. The realization hit Naomi like a wave. Giovanni Moretti was at the heart of this conspiracy. But confronting him would be a dangerous move. He was too powerful within the organization, too well-positioned. Naomi knew that if she accused him without concrete proof, it could backfire, causing irreparable damage to her standing with Dominic and the entire family. She needed to be careful. The next step was clear. Naomi had to gather more evidence, and to do that, she would need to get close to Giovanni. But the more Naomi thought about it, the more she realized that this wouldn't be a simple task. Giovanni was no fool. He was cunning, calculating, and well aware of the delicate balance of power. Naomi couldn't just play the game the way she had before. This was a new level, and she would have to navigate it carefully if she hoped to expose Giovanni without losing everything she had worked for. The stakes had never been higher. As she prepared to take her next steps, Naomi understood the cost of loyalty, the price of power. It wasn't just about securing her position in the Caruso family anymore. It was about surviving in a world where everyone had their own agenda. Naomi wasn't afraid, though. She had proven herself before, and she would do it again. This was her world now, and she was ready to fight for it. Naomi Jackson had entered the most dangerous phase of her journey yet. After uncovering Giovanni Moretti's involvement in the conspiracy, she knew that the next step would require all of her skill, precision, and patience. Giovanni was a trusted member of the Caruso family, too trusted for her to act hastily. Naomi's mind raced as she formulated her plan. She needed to gather the last pieces of evidence that would prove Giovanni's betrayal beyond a shadow of a doubt. But she couldn't afford to tip him off. She would have to be subtle, moving in the shadows, just as she had learned to do over the years. Naomi knew that the stakes had never been higher. Exposing Giovanni could lead to chaos, to an all-out war within the family, and possibly even to the collapse of everything Dominic Caruso had built. But if she did nothing, if she ignored the signs, then the entire empire could be doomed from within. There was no middle ground. As Naomi continued her investigation, she made sure to stay close to Giovanni. She needed to observe him, to understand his movements, his behaviors. She followed him from a distance, taking note of his conversations, the people he interacted with, and the places he frequented. She had to gather as much information as possible without raising suspicion. One evening, Naomi found herself at one of the family's more discreet properties. She had managed to get a meeting with Giovanni under the guise of discussing business. Her heart was pounding, but she maintained her composure, her every move calculated. "Naomi." Giovanni greeted her, his voice smooth, but there was something in his eyes, something that made Naomi's instincts flare. "I hear you've been busy lately. Handling things for Dominic, I assume." Naomi smiled, keeping her tone light, but beneath the surface, she was studying him carefully. "Just doing my part," she replied, keeping her voice even. They sat down in a private room, surrounded by luxury, but Naomi's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. Giovanni was too clever, too experienced. One wrong word, and she could blow the whole operation. The conversation began innocently enough, talk of the families, businesses, potential future deals, but Naomi could tell Giovanni was on edge. There was a tension in his demeanor, a slight flicker of unease in his eyes whenever Naomi asked the right questions. She was getting closer. She could feel it. As the night wore on, Naomi subtly steered the conversation toward the subject she knew would make him slip: his connection to the rival family. She knew that Giovanni's greed and ambition had pushed him to work with them, but she needed to hear him admit it. "You've been with the Caruso family a long time," Naomi said casually, watching his every move. "Do you ever get tired of the same old thing? The same routine?" Giovanni's smile faltered for a split second before he recovered. "No," he said, his tone firm. The Caruso family has been good to me. I've built everything I have through hard work and loyalty. Naomi nodded slowly, but the words didn't sit right with her. Loyalty, she echoed. That's a funny word in this business, isn't it? Giovanni's eyes narrowed slightly, but Naomi continued, pressing him further. Loyalty is everything. But what if someone could offer you more? More power, more money, more control? Giovanni's gaze flickered, and Naomi could see the hesitation in his eyes. It was a crack, just a tiny one, but it was enough. What do you mean? He asked, the edge in his voice sharpening. What would you do if someone came along with a better offer? Naomi asked, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. Giovanni hesitated, and in that moment, Naomi knew she had him. Loyalty is important, he repeated, but Naomi saw through it. She knew the truth. Giovanni had been feeding information to their rivals. His ambitions had led him to betray Dominic and the family he had sworn to protect. Naomi stood up slowly, her decision made. You've made your choice, Giovanni, she said, her voice steady. And now, I'll make mine. Giovanni's eyes flicked toward the door, and Naomi saw the panic flash in his eyes. He knew the game was up, but there was nothing he could do now. Naomi left the room, her heart pounding, but her mind clear. She had what she needed. She would expose Giovanni's treachery to Dominic, and then the family could deal with him in the way that only they knew how. But as Naomi walked through the halls of the estate, the weight of what she had done began to settle in. She had crossed another line. She was no longer just a trusted advisor. She was a key player in the Caruso family, someone who had proven her worth, but also someone who had made choices that could never be undone. The consequences of her actions were far-reaching, and Naomi knew that she would have to live with them. But there was no turning back now. She had earned her place, and she had earned Dominic's trust. She was in control, and nothing, no one, was going to take that from her. The Caruso empire was hers as much as it was Dominic's. As Naomi walked back to Dominic's office to deliver the news, she felt a sense of finality in the air. The decisions she had made had changed everything. But this was her world now, and she was ready for whatever came next. Naomi Jackson stood in front of Dominic's office, the weight of the decision she had made pressing on her chest. Giovanni Moretti, the man who had been one of Dominic's most trusted allies for years, was a traitor, and Naomi had exposed him. The truth was out, but the consequences of this revelation were still unknown. She had done what needed to be done, what she believed was right. But now, she had to face the aftermath. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Come in, Dominic's voice called from inside. Naomi stepped into the office, the familiar scent of leather and the quiet hum of the city beyond the windows giving her a sense of calm. Dominic was seated at his desk, looking over some papers. As he glanced up, his eyes narrowed, locking onto hers. You found what we needed, he said, his voice steady but with an edge that suggested more was coming. Naomi nodded, walking to the desk and placing the folder of evidence in front of him. It's all there, she said. Giovanni Moretti's involvement with the rival family, the financial transactions, everything. Dominic picked up the folder, flipping through the pages with practiced ease. His expression remained unreadable as he took in the contents, his fingers skimming over the documents. Naomi could feel the tension building between them. He wasn't just reading the evidence. He was assessing the damage, calculating his next move. You did well, Dominic finally said, his voice quiet but appreciative. This is exactly what I needed. Naomi held his gaze, but her mind was elsewhere. What happens next? She asked, the question hanging in the air. Dominic stood, walking over to the window as he often did when he was deep in thought. He stared out over the city, the lights twinkling in the distance, but Naomi knew his mind wasn't on the view. It was on the empire he had spent a lifetime building, and the threat that Giovanni had posed to it. Giovanni will be dealt with, Dominic said, his voice hard. But it's not just about him. It's about sending a message. We can't afford to have anyone thinking they can challenge us. Naomi knew the weight of those words. This wasn't just about removing a single traitor. It was about reinforcing their power, their control. The Caruso family could never show weakness, not even a crack. It's a dangerous game, Naomi said, her voice low. We're playing with fire. One wrong move, and it all goes up in smoke. Dominic turned to face her, his expression sharp, but there was a flicker of something else, something like respect. You've always understood the risks, Naomi, he said. That's why I trust you. You know the game better than most. Naomi felt a flicker of pride at his words, but she couldn't allow herself to get complacent. This was far from over. What about the others? She asked. There are people who will be watching, waiting for a chance to take advantage of this. Dominic nodded slowly, his gaze narrowing as he considered the situation. You're right, he said, his voice cold. There will always be people who want to take us down, but we won't give them that chance. We stay ahead of the game. Naomi stood taller, feeling the weight of her position shift once again. She was no longer just an advisor, no longer just a player on the sidelines. She was integral to the Caruso family's success, and with that came responsibility. But it also came with power. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice firm. Dominic met her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. I want you to continue what you've started. We can't let anyone think this was a one-time thing. We need to tighten our grip on everything. We need to show the world that the Caruso family is untouchable. Naomi nodded, understanding the weight of his command. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about protecting everything they had built. It was about ensuring their legacy would stand firm. The next few days were a blur of strategy and action. Naomi worked tirelessly with Dominic's closest advisors, coordinating their efforts, making sure that everything moved in perfect harmony. She met with other members of the family, ensuring that they remained loyal, keeping an eye on the people who had always been just a little too ambitious. The empire was shifting, expanding, becoming something even more powerful. But with that growth came more enemies, more people looking for ways to break through. Naomi had no illusions about what lay ahead. She had risen to this position, but staying there required constant vigilance. One night, as she walked through the quiet halls of the Caruso estate, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The girl who had once been a maid in the shadows was now standing at the center of it all, making decisions that could shape the future. It was a world of power, manipulation, and constant change. But Naomi was no longer afraid of it. She had learned to navigate it, to understand the rules of the game, and now, she was playing it better than anyone else. She reached Dominic's office just as he was preparing to leave for the night. He looked up as she entered, his expression still as sharp as ever. What's on your mind? He asked, his voice steady. Naomi didn't hesitate. We've won this round, she said, her voice clear. But there will always be more to fight for. The game never ends. Dominic smiled slightly, a rare and approving smile. You're right, he said. And we'll be ready. You've proven yourself, Naomi. Now, let's see how far you can go. Naomi felt a surge of determination. This was her world now, and she was ready to fight for it, to protect it, and to make sure that no one could ever take it from her. The future of the Caruso family was in her hands, and Naomi Jackson was ready to ensure its survival, no matter what it took.